Hello and welcome to Turning Point Tactics, the competitive Kill Team 40k podcast, focused on giving you the strategies and tactics to the initiative every turning point. I'm your host Ryan, and I'm joined by the demon host Cherubale to my Inquisitor Eisenhorn, Conor. How are you doing this evening, Conor?
I'm good, thanks, Ryan. Now, as you know, normally I just hear Corn in my head and he's saying burn, maim, kill. But lately I've been hearing a lot instead about Ashes of Faith. Have you heard about this?
Yes, I was wondering where you're going with that. I was like, the longer it went on, I was like, are we still talking about the Inquisition? Is this a self-help group?
The request for help.
Yeah, it's like, oh no, Connor's gone full werewolf again. Oh god, get the plastic skiing.
Have you seen my pills?
Yeah, the pills. Is it a full moon? It's a full moon. Oh my god, get the chains. Right, okay, yes. Absolutely. There's obviously been like loads of new teams just coming to the meta, which is like pretty awesome and like a really good way for us to start a bit of a podcast episode, because we've deviated a little bit from the standard, and we've been obviously doing the in-session squad guide, which took up a bit of capacity and time, and we're now back into the run of a mill of things. So we've got a bit of Patreon priority questions to get through to support our patrons, but also there's obviously this really exciting stuff to talk about with Ashes of Faith. So I think it'd be good just to quickly acknowledge how these teams are changing the meta, because the meta was, I would say, relatively stable for a while. Obviously, you were playing elites, and before that, it was sort of like the shooty hordes, and it was kind of like a shooty horde elite meta somewhat everywhere. I know that there was maybe some places that played it differently in the more local scenes, but generically, competitively, the shooty horde and the elite teams were doing pretty well. And what we've just seen now from GW is an injection of a lot of very melee heavy teams, and I think actually they're going to really dictate the competitive meta for a little while. So firstly, that was Gellerpox, and that was just one team, and it was a bit of like a skew list, and every now and then you'd be like, oh no, I'm having to play against this really like melee focused team. How do we deal with that? Then obviously they announced Beastmen, and now we have the Chaos Cults as well. So that's relatively like that. That's really interesting. I think across the board, and I think one of the things I'll note is that it's like the balanced data slate came out, and I was like, oh my god, this is great for intercession. And now these new teams are here, and I'm like, oh my god, this is terrible for intercession. So like, I'm interested to see how that plays out, where people are going between the two. But what do you think about this from a legionary perspective, Conor? Because they have some really good or strong melee operatives. Do you reckon this is good for them, bad for them?
I'm looking at just Ashes of Faith, or in general the new 4 teams?
Well, let's go for all 4, I think.
Yeah, it's going to certainly present some new challenges. There's a lot of threatening weapons being deployed by Votan, so you'd need to. I think I'd have to be a lot more cautious with my placement if I was playing against them. They got a lot of sneaky tricks to come up with as well. Beastmen, what are
you thinking is that's my new team. So
yeah, what are you talking about Legion for?
let's not hate on the brain dead full aggro attack team. I don't know what's wrong with them. They're a great fun team to play.
I think if I do brain dead full aggro into them, will that counter that? But no, I think there's going to be new challenges to be seen around them. Maybe even I might try some of the other what are they called, like not factions, markings. I'm thinking Slanesh as well. I never normally play that, but perhaps there's opportunities there to counter that.
Yeah, for sure. Because it's interesting, because like most people would say that the standard counter to this team is going to be Khorne, right? Because they've got a bunch of reasons as to why they can be very, very effective at killing these guys. But what I find interesting with this is that actually, because Gellerpox still exist, and like you still want the Slanesh for that, I think Slanesh is still a good pick into this. And I did put a post on Patreon talking about all the pros and cons of why I think Slanesh are good. But for sure, I think there's the roster building in Legionary's definitely got a lot more interesting with the inject of these new teams. Because, for instance, Inquisition, they're bringing in a whole lot of AP, right? And they can turn off mutagenic flesh. So I think that's really rough for them to be able to deal with that. So maybe we'll see more people
four
trying to take
four
to
AP2 guns. I think they've got access to, or
I think, well, if you include the mine from Kazakin, I think they can get up to 5, which is
5.
oof, like that's a lot of AP on the board.
That's almost
More
as
than
many
we've seen
models
before.
as I've got.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like they have an APT weapon for everyone that you bring, which is pretty nuts. And they also have obviously some really strong melee operatives as well, which is pretty cool. But like one of the things that I thought would be really interesting to talk about is, so when we're talking about Beastmen, normally, right, one of the bits of advice that I would give is that if you can, you would match asymmetrically, right? So if you're gonna be trying to kill a melee model, you would use a shooting model. But that's kind of broken with this team because you can't kill the machine, right? So like the only way to kill a beastman is to have better melee than a beastman, which is very hard to do when they're 10 wounds, 4-5 damage pretty much across the board, hitting on 3s, and almost all of them have rerolls or full relentless if they want it. So that's going to be really interesting to see how people can get around not doing the standard asymmetric matching that we would recommend, but maybe instead playing to injure. But I think they still have a little bit of a game on the positional. I don't know. I think probably from your perspective, Legionary and that sort of stuff, they can still do that. But I think from in session perspective, what I've been playing recently, I'm really not too sure what the answer is, apart from maybe just doing like a lot of damage and trying to leave people weak. But yeah, it's a tough one for sure.
I think you're onto something with the symmetric playstyle instead. Obviously, this is untested, but I like the thought process because if you kill them in their turn, they die. But if you charge them and kill them in your turn, they're not dead and they're still going to do some serious damage back. So, maybe having the melee threats forward so they charge your good models, then you might be able to kill more in their turn and thus reduce how effective they are. There's something to that, sure. I think.
For sure. I think as well, so like there's going back to sort of the core fundamentals, I think is always good for us to sort of focus on, like knowing how to use barricades effectively and actually understanding counter melee barricade placement. I don't think has ever been more important than it is now. Like, so in the past, it'd be like, there's a few models in Blooded that are quite good at melee. Like Legionary's got a few models that are quite good. But now you're going to go up against full teams that are melee focused. And if you don't know how to use those barricades effectively to protect yourself, then you're really doing yourself a disservice. So for anyone listening who's thinking, what are you talking about, Ryan? What's counter melee barricades? Check out episode 8 of the podcast. We did a whole episode on it. And if you're not a patron, you can consider joining the Patreon because we have a video talking about barricade placement, and we also have a sort of a blog post with pictures talking it through as well. So that could be a good way for you to be able to get the head up on how to effectively beat some of these melee teams because they seem pretty effective at doing that.
You touched on Inquisition earlier. I know they've excited you because you're such an Imperium fanboy. Apart from the AP, is anything else exciting you about them?
It's a pretty weird way of calling me a fascist, but you just love the Imperium, right? No, I promise I don't hold any far right ideology. We're not that kind of podcast, I promise. And we'll keep out of politics. But no, yeah, obviously, yeah, I do like the Imperium, not from a ideological point of view, but just from a lore point of view, as in like that they're a cool thing to think about rather than anything else. But Inquisition team, oh my lordy, like this team is exciting, right? But not because that I've sunk all of my hard-earned money onto the plastic crack addiction to have all of the separate teams that they come
now
with.
Now it pays off.
It pays off. It's like it's finally happened. But like, yeah, I mean, I can finally get the exaction on the board and not feel bad when I see Nurgle Legionary rock up on the opposite side, which was always a little bit of a fear previously, but. Man, it's exciting, like really, really exciting. So this is like the return to list building from the last edition, which I think a lot of people have said that they wanted, which is cool because I do think it's generally a good part of the game, and it helps add a little bit of depth where you can maybe be thinking about it at work or whatever, going like, no, what would I take against this specific team and that sort of stuff, and you can then really try and go into a min-max scenario. And it's interesting because like everyone thought when they first heard the team, like, 30 models, that's absolutely loads, like you can just choose anything you want. But actually, when I've been doing some list building, like I've already been like, I could really do like 40. Could I have 40? Maybe 50? Like how many roster slots do I need to be able to actually get everything that I want on the list? But yeah, no, it's very thematic, I think, which is cool because obviously the Inquisition is all about knowing your opponent, sending undercover operatives, and all that sort of stuff. And I think this team's really going to be successful for players that really know what's understands a team that's across them on the board, right? So if you know what you're going up against and you understand what their ploys are, what their synergies are, I think that's where this team's going to shine. Whereas if you don't know and you're just sort of like a person that plays one faction, they get really, really good at their own faction, then this team's probably quite hard for you because it's more about being able to be reactive. So like knowing that on a certain turn, your opponent has a crucial ploy that they must play to be able to win the game, and being able to just say no for 1 CP is huge, right? Like that's game changing. Being able to know that there's a certain model that they have to activate at a certain time, and once per game being able to say not him. That's like in the hands of a competent player. That those are such effective tools, like so effective. Which is really, really interesting. So it's going to really reward people that have that in-depth knowledge of their opponent's teams and not just their own, which I think is really, really cool. So I'm excited to see them on the table and get to play them. Although that being said, we're looking at quite a heavy melee meta. So how we're going to adapt this team to be able to play with them effectively, I don't know. How about you, Conor? Any thoughts on the team?
Well, you touched on thematically, and I do love the fact that this is the one kill team that, from a thematic lore narrative perspective, they can have a fight with anyone, and it makes sense. If they're fighting against like Harlequins, well, they're the aliens, yeah, they got to go get them. They're fighting against Legionary, well, they're Chaos, got to go fight them. Fighting against another Inquisition team, well, there might have been Heresy in one of the other.
They're radicals, a bit Puritan. Yeah. Let's get rid of them. Like
they can scrap with anyone. I like that.
Yeah, and I think it's gonna with the whole narrative background they're going down. I think it's gonna be really, really interesting for people because you can get so much depth in this team, right? Like, and for a lot of people who have been collecting for quite a while, it's like, hey, here's a team where you get rewarded for having picked up all the boxes in a sense, and suddenly you can throughout the course of a tournament play these different teams in different scenarios and really min max, which I think's really, really cool. I will caveat this with, I feel that they're going to be very, very unforgiving. Like it's one of those things where there's so much choice, there could almost be too much choice, and people can get lost in that, I think, and start making bad choices, like trying to experiment maybe. So I think the skill floor is going to be pretty high as people get to know this team, just like Pathfinders were. Traditionally, 7 wound models with 5 up saves is they're fragile, and if you don't know what you're doing with that, then it's going to be difficult. And I think as well, I think everyone's looking at them like they have almost infinite CP because of the auto savant. But I really don't think that's the case. Like, I think CP budgeting is going to be so important for this team. Like, they have so many abilities that you want to use. Like you're going to have to really focus on when to use each one. And make sure that each CP is effectively being used. And that's why I say you've got to know your opponent, right? You've got to know when to use it and when it's going to be worthwhile, and not just throw it away. But oh god, they seem like so much fun, which I'm really, really excited about. So hopefully we're going to get them built soon. Like I think I've got a box. Our local store, like I missed out on the original pre-order. Our local store got 2 more. They said that they had one for me. I'm waiting for it to arrive. Like these, I never thought it'd be so hard to get your hands on like plastic. But it is. It's worse than the Kazakin, believe it or not, which is pretty nuts.
I think it's scalpers. It's the new era of Chat GPT AI coming in, and they're taking our plastic.
It is a bit of a shame, really. Like I understand why people do it from a financial point of view, but I just think that it's so damaging for the wider game for people not to be able to get these teams. And it's I'd much rather that everyone in the kill team community has the team that they actually want to play, rather than some 40k scalper out there sat on 6 boxes just trying to shift them for massive profit. But that's the world we're in, which is a bit of a shame. And this hobby is only getting more expensive as time goes on. So I guess some people are trying to find ways of funding it, but it's hopefully the kill teams out there get it and get their hands on it, because I know it's a pretty contentious point.
As a knock-on effect, though, I am enjoying all the hobbying that I'm actually seeing now, because people haven't been able to get hold of the team they wanted, so they then had to look at the rest of the Warhammer range to try and build it from scratch and kit bash their teams. And some of the stuff people are coming up with look amazing. So that's a cool side effect of this phenomenon.
Oh, for sure. And I was actually thinking maybe we should do an episode on like how you can proxy all the models, because I was looking through and finding all the various models that I could, because I thought I hadn't got the box, and I was like, well, if I buy Eisenhorn and I buy like the Imperial Guard Preacher and maybe the Regimental Advisors, I can use these models to like build the rest of the roster. And then obviously someone said like, oh yeah, we've potentially got a box, and I was like, I want to get the box, because you know how much I hate hobbies. So
like, pay someone to get the box.
That's how excited I was about this team. I was thinking about hobby, which is wild, but that's where we were at. Okay, Connor. So
what about how they play? Not so much the hobby. Like we've talked a bit about some of the ploys. Is there any ploys that catch your eye, or?
Yeah, so I like, and there's a bit of a debate on quarry. So I like the idea of quarry. I'm pretty sure that the intent of it is that it's like it's endlessly going forward. So as soon as you kill the quarry, you select a new one, and then you select a new one, you select a new one. I think that's the idea of it, but it's a little bit confusing as it is written, in the sense that is it that you just select one when they die, you select another one, that's it, or whatever. But I like the idea that the Inquisitor's like, no, this guy, I've got a real problem with him, and he goes to the next one, because team-wide balance against a certain model is actually pretty legit, particularly with a lot of the four plus weapons that you have on the team. So you do need it. The other like abilities and synergies. I mean, I was writing a whole post on the Patreon earlier talking about loads of the really cool things that these guys can do. So like, let's talk about the leader. So I've heard the leader touted as like the worst leader in the game, and I mean, to be fair, it's not a bad assessment, right? Like he's not great on paper when you first look at him, but like there is a bunch of like cool things that you can pair up to make him actually somewhat credible. So I was looking at, if you take the Interrogator and you have the Denunciation book, which is the +1 attack against enemies within 2 inches, you then upgrade his auto pistol to become master crafted, and then suddenly when he gets within 2 inches of people, he's got 5 attacks, hitting on 3s, 3-4 damage with his pistol, which actually like isn't too bad. And then if you give him the power knife as well, he's then 4 attacks hitting on 4s, lethal 5, 3-5. So suddenly he goes from being this like leader, which is, pretty terrible, to like almost a Kellamorph level of shooting. He doesn't get the P1, doesn't hit on 2s. It's not almost Kellamorph. It's a lie. But like he's still okay. He's not completely terrible. He's just like, he's better than an average guardsman, which I think is what people want. But one thing I would say to people doing that is, if you're playing against Seek and Destroy and your opponent might be taking Headhunter, don't do that. Don't take the guy and put him up threat like really far ahead, because I think he could get really hurt. But let me talk. I'm gonna spill the beans and a whole bunch of other stuff that I think is really exciting about this team. Like, so I think the breaches are really cool, right? So I know that a lot of people are a fan of the Vet Guard. They think the Vet Guard's gonna be really good, but personally, I just think the breaches have such a unique tool set that will make them really good. And I think it goes, when people look at their models, I think it goes beyond their strategic ploys and their tactical ploys. They are really good on their team sheets, but breaches now with access to long range shooting and a bunch of other benefits, I think is still really, really strong. So we talked about the Interrogator and his Denunciation book, but you can also have the Tome Skull with his Sanctification book. Now, if you stick that guy next to the Endurant, well, suddenly your Endurant is like -1 attack dice, which is like a Legionary trophy, and everyone knows how strong the Legionary trophy is. Pair that with a 2+ save and 10 wounds, like that guy is tanky. Like he is gonna,
he's not going down,
he's not going down like without a lot of firepower going into him. And he can also shield your gunner. So, like, you bring a plasma gun or whatever, your las volley, and suddenly this guy's just walking forwards, tanking it, and he's not got any issues. And the fact that he has a relentless gun as well. So suddenly you have a las volley that's relentless, him with a relentless shotgun, like as a little like duo moving up the board and going to certain points. That's really durable, like combination, like -1 attack dice against all those models, which I think is really, really cool. And the cat just like he opens up stuff as well. So the Hex Assist that everyone I think is a little bit meh on, like, because obviously Hex Assist, for those who don't know, that's the guy that can basically, if he sees you, you're in his line of sight and you're within 6 inches, he can spend an APL and he can remove a rule from your data sheet, which most of the time I agree is probably pretty meh. But let's say like you're playing against, I don't know, Gelapox, and you have Volgar Thrice Cursed out at the front leading the charge, and you were to maybe say remove his 5-up Feel No Pain, like just go like you no more Feel No Pain, and you can obviously achieve that by using the cat, because that little survey would mean that now suddenly he's within line of sight even if he's in heavy cover, and then suddenly boom, get rid of those Feel No Pains, and then you can fire a plasma cannon into him or a multi-melt, whatever it's going to be, and hopefully put that big guy down. And that could be like really, really brutal to a Gelapox team. Like just killing a key model like that, really brutal. Or an Anointed, removing his Unleash the Beast ability, so suddenly he loses his Feel No Pains, he loses Lethal 5, he loses Ceaseless. Oh, like that could be absolutely brutal.
Could he then, in that scenario, pick up an objective? I don't know.
That's a good point. Can he start doing mission actions then?
You got rid of the demon. I can open the door
suddenly
now.
just
Thank
like,
you.
oh, I know how to open this door again. Thank you. Walk through. Well, I mean, I imagine you're going to do it after he's activated, and he's probably about to eat a multi-melter after that. So,
true.
But yeah, like, I mean, I'm going to put a few caveats on this, right? So, I would love to talk about his team in infinite depth, but my first caveat is going to be like, I think they're a very complex team, and I haven't played enough of them to be able to tell you everything that I think is good yet, right? Like, I think it's going to be a little while before I can credibly say this is what's good and this is what's bad with any sort of definitive answer, because I think it'd be foolish of me to try and say that now, right? Like there is so much depth. But what I will say is the thing that I'm looking at on the roster is taking Navis, RBTs, and Kazakin. And I'll just quickly explain why, and people, if they want to know more, can go on the Patreon or whatever and have a look at there. But I think Navis gives you the best tool set against like hordes, and gives you more melee options, gives you more weapon options. You get the free grenades, you get the the hatch cutter ability, which is really useful if you need it. You have the axe jack with his Feel No Pain. I think that's just a generically really strong set of skills that they can bring. So I like them in most instances. They're probably my go-to support asset, because it's also going to be 13 activations. The RBTs, I think, is a really interesting one, where I think you take them against mid-range. And by obviously mid-range, for those that won't listen to the baseline episode, that's when we talk about Harlequins, we talk about Corsairs, we talk about Drakari. Think if they're fast, they have pointy ears and like to run at you with knives, then I think your RBT is your friend, because you're going to spam 4 damage weapons, right? They can also shoot into combat. Don't forget about that, because that's on their data sheet. It's not a faction ability. Oof. No hiding in combat for you silly clowns. And boom, yeah, like 4 damage shotguns hitting on 3s. I think you can really put the hurt on and put some pressure on people with that. So, I think they could be a good mid-range counter. And then Kazakin, I think, is actually a very niche case. I think it's for when you're playing loot and you're against elites, and you really want that APL shifting between models to happen, and you need that extra APL on the board in the right places. I think you're going to do that really, really well. So, like there's so much like to unpack in that team, but that's what I'm looking at the moment. I've not put Vetguard on the roster. Maybe that's a mistake. I've not put Sisters of Silence on the roster. Again, maybe that's a mistake. I know that not putting Silence on the roster is a good call, because they did those boys dirty. I'm real sorry, Silence. But yeah, like there's so much in this team. I'm excited to see what people come up with. Like what counters they think about, and where they think the strengths and weaknesses lie.
The thing I'm looking forward to the most is baiting out a worthy cause from a fusion bomb and then saying absolute authority, no, you don't get your points back, and it's my turn.
Yeah, or you just go once per game, like you can't activate him for D3. Like activations. It's like, oh no, like I've committed everything to this, and then it's like, yeah, no, he's dead. And you were talking about a really cool combo earlier, which I liked, which is seek and destroy, where if you do the combination of eliminate guards and then also saying I'm delaying your activation by D3, but they can't even run the guard away. Like that's so useful to be able to like guarantee it and go, actually, he's not activating, and he is going to sit there and he's going to eat whoever it is that's going to go and charge him and kill him or shoot him with a gun in the face, which I think is so cool. So yeah, it's awesome. Okay, Connor. So if people are listening and they think, hey, this is pretty informative, this is good stuff. I want to help out. I want to support more. How could they go about, helping the podcast grow, getting it to where it needs to be, and helping us improve our product as time goes on?
Yeah, so the easy thing to do is just to hit that like and subscribe button. Because if we can get to 1,000 subscribers, then that's the point when YouTube will start to monetize us. And we're now looking at it. We've gone over 900. So thanks so much for everyone doing that. That's such a great amount of support that we've seen from everybody. And please continue to like and subscribe so we can get to that 1,000 mark. Or perhaps you're looking for a little bit more additional content, then you can, for £3 a month, join our Patreon, which for us, that would get us a pot of blood for the Blood God Technical Paint, which we all know we need plenty of that. But for you, that would get you early access to all our videos, as well as some exclusive Patreon-only content, access to our Patreon-only Discord, and then also our Q&A Patreon priority questions as well. Finally, if you're excited by these teams and you want to buy Ashes of Faith, or maybe you want to have a go at kit bashing some, then if you buy them through Element Games, who often provide discounts and money off, and if you buy it through our affiliate link below, then that's another way you can support the podcast too.
Yeah, I do. And once again, just like a massive thank you for those of you that are hitting subscribe. Like, it really is helping a really small channel like ours get off the ground. And as we said, we are so close to those 1,000 subscribers. So Turning Point Tactics need you to do your part and just hit that subscribe button so we can get there. And we are so nearly there.
Thank you.
Yeah, really, really thank you. And also another massive thank you to our patrons who are diligently supporting us as we go through. And as a bit of a sort of reward for that, we do the patron priority questions, which I think is probably a good thing for us to roll into now, Conor, right?
Yeah, I don't think we've got time to go into the cultists because we were going to talk about them. Maybe we should save them for another week and jump into the patron priority questions.
Yeah, sounds good. We'll go straight into it.
Gleaming. So, question 1. Do you have any tips for navigating the middle tier of your development as a player? What kind of things would you recommend to really break through that mid-table plateau?
Okay, so I think there's a few parts to this, right? So a lot of people when they're trying to get better at a player, they'll start by learning one faction. They'll try to get really good with that faction, and then they'll start trying to learn their opponent's factions. And it can get a bit too much. If you try and learn the 20 plus teams that there are straight away, then that can be too much data to process immediately. And then you can start forgetting stuff. You might start forgetting the core basics of your own team. So I do think it's very, very important to focus on your own team's abilities as well as learning your opponent's abilities, but maybe do it in a more broad way. All right. So maybe you just go, actually, let's learn about how I'm going to beat, and you group them together mid-range. I'm going to have a mid-range strategy. I'm going to have a horde strategy. I'm going to have a brute strategy. I'm going to have an elite strategy. And then maybe you can then start devising that a bit further and you go, okay, what if it's a shooting horde? What if it's a melee horde? How's my game plan going to change against those? What's their win condition? What's that sort of thing? And then if you can then start learning the tack ops that your opponent loses and focus on them. So that's how they're going to win the game, right? It's points. So then think about, right, how am I really going to deny a seek and destroy shooty horde? Like, how is that going to work for me? How am I going to deny a melee shooty horde that's got seek and destroy? A melee horde that's got seek and destroy. That kind of thing, right? So if you can try and focus on those sort of broad bits, that might really help break down the problem set. Okay, we're back in the room. Apologies for that little break that we had there. You probably won't notice it because I managed to hit pause. But for those that don't know, I've got a new puppy. I'm in the process of puppy training and all that sort of good stuff. And I thought for a second he was going to shit inside. So I had to sprint to the back door to make sure I wasn't tidying up any Really doggy stuff. So
If I
luckily,
pooed myself, that's the excuse I would use too.
yeah, yeah. it, wa- it wasn't me. It was a dog. I promise. Yeah. So, and it's another reason why things are maybe a little bit slow due to lack of sleep. I mean, puppies are lovely though. Honestly, they're the best thing in the world. But you also don't get much sleep in the first few weeks. So hopefully all this still makes sense and is coherent. Maybe this is why Conor thinks his tactics are good, because he has the same with kids. Sorry, that was a smear. Right, anyway, where are we?
Are we back on track? I don't know. It's so far from the tracks. I
So
don't know where we
far
are.
from the rails. What are rails again? Rails are a metal girder. Right, sorry. So yeah, we were talking about basically taking baselines, building a game plan for those baselines, and I think that's just going to reduce some of the mental workload, that's required. So I think if you can focus on baselines and then sort of like tack ops or the archetypes that surround them, and then build your tactics based on that, because if you can do that, that's going to be a pretty good starter for 10. And then the next level above that is where you learn all of the intricacies of each individual team. But that can obviously be quite a lot to process, especially at a tournament. Because the other thing I would say is that it's usually when you get to the bigger tournaments, you start going into round 5 and round 6, where you start getting a bit more tired, and it's very easy for those mistakes to then show themselves and gaps in knowledge to become more apparent. And one thing that I've found that I do is, weirdly, I don't know if it's boredom from repetition, but maybe that was just like Warhammer Fest of just doing the same map over and over again. But it's like you can get yourself more experimental as time goes on during a tournament, and maybe it's it's a little bit of a hubris. You get a little bit, I've won 3 now, and suddenly, boom, I'm on a roll, and away you go. So another thing that I'd recommend is, if that's what you're struggling with, is just make a checklist. Have a it might be a mental checklist, it might be a physical checklist, but have some key things that you're going to run through each turn and go, is this the right thing to be doing now? Is there a consideration that I should be making during this turning point? And that could help you. And the final advice, and it's like the classic advice, isn't it? It's it's just practice. You've got to get the reps in, but you've also got to get the reps in with a good training partner. And I would say you have to be able to honestly talk to each other and give each other feedback that's helpful. There's no point holding back on something where you see your opponent really make a mistake during a casual game, and just letting them carry on making those mistakes, because it's detrimental to them, but it's also detrimental to you. So you want to make sure that they get better as a player, so that they can give you a better game, because you're only ever going to meet better players at tournaments anyway. So far better to have that practice on your Thursday, Friday club night, wherever it is, than it is to be doing it on tournament days. So make sure that you're both trying to support the same aim. You're there to help each other get better, and get those practice rounds in, and it might make the game, hopefully make the game more enjoyable and more fun as time goes on. And keep yourself open to those ideas and receptive to feedback. No need to have an ego about it. You're not always right. I mean, I am, but not everyone else. That is a joke. But don't have an ego about it. There is much you can learn, and I've learned a lot just from talking to the community and hearing what people think and that sort of stuff, and changing my opinions as time goes on. And I think that's a really good way of developing past that mid threshold and into the upper levels.
Before I jump into question 2, can I just expand on that point you made about practice? Just want to hear your thoughts. So, do you think there's something to be said about maybe approaching, almost looking at it as a season and saying, do you know what, I really want to do well at Warhammer World and at Warhammer Fest. They're going to be my 2 tournaments that I really care about this season. And then to do that, I'm going to have some practice games at some small local tournaments, and then attend those. And I'm not really thinking about winning. I'm thinking about just understanding my team and understanding how the core principles of my team. Do you think there's a strategy there?
Absolutely, and I think that's a good and healthy way of doing it. So if I was going to recommend people to be to try and be the most competitive that they can be, that's how I'd recommend it. So it's find the head mark tournament that you really want to work towards and you want to build towards, and make sure that you put in the work that's going to get you to that tournament ahead of time. And because what you want to do is you want to make sure that you've had those matchups against those archetypes. So, you know, there's an element of, you know, come here, listen to this podcast, listen to our theory, see what we think, but like that's based on my play style, not your play style. So maybe you need to then take that, adapt and go, actually Ryan likes to do this, but I found that in this instance this works better against this team. And that's, you know, that's perfect, right? Because I don't know what your local meta is like. It might be completely different to mine. I think actually having now played against Polish, Spanish, and seen some of the American scenes, actually a lot of the lessons read across to all the major competitive scenes. But absolutely, Conor, I think that's 100% like the way I recommend going about it is, you know, focusing on a head mark tournament and then trying to build yourself up to it. Obviously, I'm not doing that because I'm doing a podcast, so I'm trying to learn more teams to talk about more teams.
Dan Barton is.
Yeah, Dan Barton is for sure. Once again, a salute to the the British Navy, led by Dan Barton in fending off another Spanish invasion. But maybe we can take it to them next. You know, that'd be really cool. I think to be able to get to Spain and get some more games down there with them. But I'm excited to see how Dan gets on at the Atlanta games if he gets to go, which would be really cool.
He's got 2 golden tickets.
He's got 2 golden tickets. You know, he's just stacking them up. Doesn't know what to do with them. At this rate, he's going to go on a plane on his own, which is like so crazy.
All the seats.
Is that an auto win? Like, I don't know. Like if it's a private jet, like what happens there? But no, he's done really good. We should probably get him on the podcast at some point, actually, because I'd love to hear his thoughts on breaches. He must be pretty excited about his Inquisition squad as well. Although last, I think I heard he was actually looking in intercession, so I guess we'll see. But I think that's probably covered off that question, Conor.
Sure.
Unless anything else you think?
No, let's jump into question 2. So, as a player getting most of their games via TTS, are there any specific things one should keep in mind when preparing for a physical competitive event?
Okay, yeah, I think it's a really interesting one because we're seeing a lot of people obviously coming out of that TTS generation where, you know, COVID happened, they had pretty much all of their competitive experience on TTS. And a lot of those players are now going to their sort of like real life tournaments. And it was interesting. There was a guy that I used to play on TTS with ages ago, back in our old edition. I think he took a break. He's just come into the new edition, and he's joined the Patreon. He was chatting to me on there the other day, and he went to a real life like tournament for the first time with one of his teammates. He's also joined the Patreon. I'm pretty sure they came like second. Like they did really, really well. And that's because I think like TTS can set you up for success quite well. And then like you can then bring a lot of the lessons across to be able to really do well in real life. But there is a few things I will say is different and worth noting before you get there. So my first point is going to be that accuracy of movement is far harder in real life, right? Like you cannot get to the same levels of like millimetric precision that you can in TTS. It's just not a thing. But there are ways that you can help that, right? So you can get tools like the stepping tools or, you know, like individual 1-inch bases that you can use to be able to help yourself like understand or like get more accurate measurements as time goes on. I think that could be a really good way of helping you if you're used to having very accurate measurement tools. But just be aware that obviously your opponent won't have that as well. So be ready to lend those out if you need to make sure you get that more accurate. But what you'll find will help in that as well is if you can get both players to agree on intent. So if you think it's going to be in charge range, like you talk about it, they talk about it, everyone agrees, and you move on, and then like it's going to speed up the game, right? Rather than being like, actually you're just short, you're well in, whatever it's going to be. You can then have that conversation ahead of time, and as long as both players agree, it saves you having to do that like very, very fine faffing that you would have to do normally. So that could be a really useful way to do it. The other thing I've noticed is that like it's the ability to access quick references. So like on TTS, you can assign like a data card to the model itself, and you can see it all when it's all there. And you can probably have like a dual screen up, and on one half of your screen, you've got all of the rules for your team, and you've got all the rules for your opponent's team. And so you have this like constant like awareness of what's going on. And like, you could, if you wanted to, load up on your phone, some sort of rules website. I'm not endorsing it, but whatever you want to have, or you could have like a bag full of books and have all the books available to you. That could be a way of doing it as well. But I think you're probably going to find that that's maybe a bit too cumbersome. I've seen some people have actual physical data cards for their models, which I think is quite usable if you have a small team, like you have like Intercession or something like that. You can do that and you have a very quick reference, or maybe you have it for a bigger team as well. So that could be a good way around it if you're finding that you're struggling to retain the information immediately to hand. Maybe having those data cards would be a good way of doing it. That's probably something we should make at some point, but that could be useful for people. Now I think about it, but like just having those, that the knowledge of the weapon stats immediately to hand. I think I just spend so much time looking at various weapon stats and all that sort of stuff that I've somehow ingrained it in my mind, but like probably at the cost of like core memories that are actually important to normal living. But yeah, like he needs to know about what they did when they were a kid. Like, when was that? That wasn't this week, was it? Oh God, not again. Another one missed. Yeah, so maybe data cards could be a good way to help you out in that scenario as well. So I think it's understanding what T-Test gives you, which is like a really good understanding of the core mechanics of the game, the principles. It gives you exposure to loads of teams, loads of different scenes, and all that sort of stuff. But what it doesn't give you is like the social interactions that you have across a table with someone, and having to work with them to be able to get the outcome that you want in the timeline that you have, right? Because if you try to go at a very slow pace and measure everything out, you're never going to finish the game, and vice versa for your opponent. If you're being too difficult with your opponent, they're going to struggle to complete the game in the timeline you have. So ideally, you both use chess clocks, and we should normalize that, but that's not the case just yet for everywhere. So I think probably using those methods of speeding up your game is going to be really, really helpful, and having better tools to help your measurement will be helpful as well. That's probably what I'd recommend for that, Conor.
Yeah, valid. Cool. Shall we do question 3?
Yeah, let's do it.
In episode 18, you brought up an interesting way of dissecting games. Are there processes from your professional experience that you find useful to prepare for Kill Team?
Yeah, so I think it's a really interesting one. So clearly we talked about in the background, like you and I both have a military background, and there's various things that we've pulled across from the debriefing system of the military to be able to try and get stuff or to learn better lessons and be able to apply them on the tabletop. Now, clearly, like real life military operations are a little bit more complex than the tabletop version of Kill Team, whatever. But like there is a whole bunch of stuff that I think you
there's
can
less
100%.
Dice.
There's less dice in real life, but the odds are probably worse. Or I don't know. Hopefully, we never find out, right? Like, well, there are people finding out right now, I guess. But yeah. So so like, there's a whole bunch of stuff that I think you can pull out of it. I think just to keep this one on timeline, I'm just going to do it from like the highest level first, and maybe in future episode we can break it down into like some more tactical levels. But one of the things the UK has is the UK Principles of War, which are a bunch of principles, which means if you do these things, you're going to be successful, right? So and what I've done is I've looked at a few of them that I think have like pull across or read across to Kill Team, and just decided just to bring them out so people can see that if you stick to these principles, you can have more success and do better on your day-to-day gaming sessions. So and there are more than this. These are just the ones that I think's useful, but you can obviously Google UK Doctrine Principles of War and you'll be able to get them out. So the first one is selection and maintenance of the aim, right? So you have to try and find an objective that works, and you then have to pursue that objective until it's completed. Now, to me, I read that of like, what is the win condition, right? So like, what is the thing that you're trying to do, and how is it you achieve it? And then you have to try and continually press towards it, right? And that is like one of the most important things that is in Kill Team. If you start deviating from what your win condition is, so my win condition is to play recon, score points, and get more VP than my opponent, and suddenly you find yourself on turning point 4 going, yeah, but I could go kill this random guy over here because it's more fun, then like, is that maintenance of the aim? Like, are you focusing on what it is that you're trying to do? Probably not. Readjust yourself and refocus and try and keep on what you need to do. The next one is maintenance of morale. And this is like a really interesting one, because people are like, what? That's a principle of war? And it's like, absolutely. Like, if you feel down in the dumpster about the game, you're probably not going to be making the best decisions. And And there was this has happened to me more and more, but there was like this happened at Warhammer Fest where I thought I've probably lost this. I've probably lost this, but maybe I can bring it back. And just by playing consistently, I brought it back. And I think that's like a really important lesson for people to have is like, do not think that the game is over until it is over. Don't count yourself out, right? Until that bell rings, until you're tabled, you still have like a dog in the fight. So it's all about not getting triggered, right? So it's all about going, that was statistically highly unlikely to happen, but you know what? I'm going to roll with the punches. I'm going to maintain that morale. I'm going to have a fun time, whatever happens, and I try and keep going. The next one is offensive action. Like, nice and simple. You've got to remove your enemy's pieces, right? Because they're the pieces that let them score points. So if they don't have any models on the board, then they can't score points. But like, you have to then sort of prioritize that in accordance with your aim that you're trying to achieve to make sure that your offensive action is going in the right place, which pairs quite nicely with the next one, which is concentration of force. So like, are your synergies, like are the models that you're using together the right amount of models to be able to actually achieve what you're trying to do? And like one of the things that I would like, an example I'd say is like, let's say you shoot all your models at different models and you play against Vet Guard and you do 3 damage to every single one of those Vet Guard models. Like, you've achieved absolutely nothing doing that, right? like you've done nothing. But if you remove, instead of doing that, let's say you remove 5 models of their team during a turn, actually you've done a sizable amount, right? So concentrate that force to then be able to, remove those enemy models. And then the next one is going to be economy of effort, which I think, again, like this goes really into like well together, because it's like, right, you want to make sure that you're being offensive, you're removing models, you're going to concentrate that force, but you're not going to go overkill, right? You're not going to shoot 14 models at one guy, right? You're not going to just like make it so all of your team is focusing on one model. You want to try and make sure you allocate that effort that you need to remove that model. But you can same can be said for objectives. You want to make sure that you allocate just enough models to take the objective, right? If you're throwing 3, 4, 5 models on an objective, you're just going to get hit by a blast weapon next turn and regret it, right? So economy of effort, put in just about the right amount of effort for each of the objectives that you're trying to achieve as you go through. And the final one, which I think's probably the most like applicable to board games, is flexibility, right? Like, literally nothing is going to go to plan, right? Even with a 96.7% chance of winning based on a plasma pistol reroll, right? Like, sometimes it's not going to pay off for you, which will hurt, right? But you've got to be flexible, and you've got to adapt, and you've got to keep going. Say, like, one of the suggestions that I have is, try and get models to be like swing models. So let's say you allocate a plasma gun to shoot one guy and a melt gun to shoot another guy right now, and you're expecting those both to get a kill. Maybe you put your grenade launcher in a position where he could shoot either of those models a second time, so that if your melter gun whiffs and only does 6 damage, or if your plasma gun whiffs, like, you have that ability to then back it up with a different threat. And that, again, comes back to that concentration of force and economy of effort. If you can put those models in positions where they can threaten 2 at once, and you can then decide as the game goes on where you're going to send that effort and how you're going to concentrate it to make sure you achieve the aim that you set out right at the beginning of the game. So I think that's probably what I would say at the high level. Hopefully that's useful, and maybe we'll do a bit more of a deep dive into that in future. Like, what lessons can we pull out from the professional sphere?
I like it, and I like the way that it can apply before, during, and after the battle as well. Like, you can have your strategy going in. You're thinking, this is what we're going to do, and this is how I'm going to win. This is my win condition. Then in the middle of the battle, you're thinking, oh, am I actually maintaining the mission? Am I going to do it? Do I need to be flexible here? Do I need to change tact? And then afterwards, once you've won or lost, you can go, where could I have done better? Was I concentrating my force? Was I applying economy of effort? Is that why I won, lost? It's usable at any point.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's an interesting point, because like, you almost want to have aims for every turning point as well. Like, on this turning point, I'm going to score X amount of primary. I'm going to try and score X tac op, whatever it's going to be. And that's how I'm going to get there. And I'm going to allocate this much resource to do it. And I'm also going to try and deny my opponent X, Y, and Z. And if you sort of set those aims as you go through each turning point, you can then sort of break it down into those manageable chunks where you're realizing, like, as you go through, you have a measure of success. Like, am I doing what I need to do? Do I need to take more risk? Do I need to take less risk? Like, maybe I actually had a really successful turn 1 and I denied them more VP. Well, I don't need to take more risk on turn 2 then, turn 3. Like, you don't need to throw the game away at that point. But I think that answers it, Conor. Should we go on to question 4?
Yeah, we got one last question here. So this is regarding CP budgets. Do you limit your CP spend to 2 per turn, aiming to spend them all by the end of turn 3, leaving just 1 point for the final round? What's the payoff between CP and turns left in the game?
Okay, so I think that's a really interesting question. There's a few points there that I think we should probably break down. I think what I'll do, Conor, is I'll start with a question. If I ask you, what do you think the most important turning point is of the game?
100% turning point 5.
Oh, right. Okay. I see how it is. I'm telling you now, right? I had him on the ropes. He was there. He was sweating on turning point 5. Unbelievable. I'll never live this down. Nope. The joke is he really wasn't. I was in a bad place, but God damn. No, kind of the correct answer was actually turning point 2. Oh. But yes. Okay. So the most important turning points is turning point 2 and probably turning point 3. So, man, it's gonna be hard to live this one down. But right, anyway, so turning point 1 is predominantly is a positioning turning point with maybe the opportunity for some opportunistic kills here and there if people position poorly, right? So it's more about punishing a mistake but setting up for turn 2. So when you're using your ploys, you want to try and bias them towards the most important turning points. So turning point 2 is where I'd expect the majority of a CP to be spent, and same for turning point 3. Now, that being said, let's say that you've drawn a short straw and your deployment's really bad and you have to spend CP turn 1 to do domino field or brace for counterattack or some sort of defensive buff to mean that you actually get to turning point 2. Well, I'm looking at that as an investment in turning point 2 because it's getting you there. So maybe you're playing Corsairs and to get the positioning that you need, turning point 1, you have to spend the Eldari agility so that you're in a good position. Turning point 2 will be a valid example of a good CP spend. So I think, you want to bias your offensive and defensive buffs into those most important turning points. But there is no set rule, right? There's always going to be an exception or a caveat to why spending CP could be worth it. If, for instance, you've got 5 dice and if you roll 1-6 on those 5 dice, you're going to win the game. Well, sure, you're going to CP reroll every single one of them and hope for that 6 if it's a guaranteed win, and you were going to lose otherwise. But majority of the time, doing 5 CP rerolls, I'll tell you, is an absolutely terrible idea, and you should never ever do it, right? So, it's that there is a little bit of background context needed for every situation. So, I think probably the better advice would be it's fine to spend CP so long as you know what you're buying and what you're losing, right? So what is it gaining you and what is it costing you? So that's where in the in-session squad guide, which you guys if you haven't seen yet, you can go check that out. We give a rough budget of here's your 7 CP. This is what I think you should be spending it on. And then when you do your CP reroll, you know that, okay, that's just cost me another tack ploy, or that's just cost me a strat ploy, or whatever it's going to be. And that's fine if you say, you know what, actually, in this instance, that's worth it. Me not having my doctrine on turn 4 is worth it. If I win the game on turn 3, then that's fine, right? But just be aware that that's where the cost might be coming. So I think if you can do that, then really you've understood the key reasoning behind CP budgeting. It's not about telling you that it's a strict rule. You cannot spend this much here or there, and you have to do this. That's not the way it is. It's always a bit more flexible than that. But it's more about okay, so I want to spend let's do Corsairs for example. On turn 1, I want to spend Eldari agility. On turn 2, maybe I'm spending for light fingers, or and then turn 3, I want to spend this. And you just allocate roughly how much you're spending each turn and roughly where you want to spend it. And then you can go, all right, and that's left me with, let's say, 3 CP for my CP rerolls. That's fine. If you have the opportunity to do a CP reroll on turn 1, well, you can take it. If that makes sense, take it. But maybe it's more important in turning point 2. I don't know. But like, you have to then make that decision, right? And if it's going to be that you're doing the 4th CP reroll, well, has that just cost you outcasts or whatever it's going to be that your game plan is based on? So just think about that. That's probably how I'd summarize that. Any thoughts you have, Conor? Any fill-ins?
No, but I noticed it ties in quite nicely with the previous question there when you're talking about you've got your CP budget, but make sure that it's flexible. Don't have to stick to it rigidly, and asking yourself, how is my CP budget helping me complete the mission and win the game overall? And then also just that self-reflection piece afterwards, and you go, okay, game didn't go how I wanted to and I lost it. Why did I lose it? Well, turning point 3, let's say, this example, turning point 3, my Nurgle Legionary, I didn't have enough CP for mutagenic flesh, and that extra damage cost me. And why didn't I have enough CP? Well, because I did a reroll earlier on something that was actually irrelevant. I shouldn't have re-rolled it. So there's an element of experience to it as well.
And maybe it's something as simple as, light fingers on a loot objective, and but you spent it on a CP reroll, right? And then suddenly you don't have that light fingers. That's the one VP that you're going to take away from your opponent, give to yourself, and that's the point swing that wins you the game. And it's like, that's again where you get back to selection and maintenance of the game. What is actually going to win you the game? What's going to lose it? Focus on those points, and hopefully that'll bring you more victories more consistently going forwards. So that was obviously for the patrons out there. So hopefully, guys, that those answer your questions. If not, drop another question on the Discord. And we'll answer it, or we can reattack it in the next patron priority questions, which I'm sure will be coming up soon, which will be really cool to do. Anything else, Conor, that you want to throw in?
Are we about to finish on time? What's going on there? This is not.
I think actually we should probably stretch this out for another 45 minutes because everyone's really receptive to an hour and 45-minute tactical chat on In Session Squad. It is funny, like how much do you want to try and squeeze into an episode before people go, this is too much for one day? And I think we need to keep it sub 1 hour. So I think that's going to bring us to the end of this episode. Hopefully, the people listening, you found something new or useful while listening to this episode. And if you did, as I said, throwing a like would be greatly appreciated, but hitting that subscription button so you get a notification as soon as the next episode drops, but also that's a really useful way to support us on our way to 1,000 subscribers, which is really, really awesome. If you don't want to wait and you want early access to a lot of this content and access to our Discord, patron priority questions, and all that sort of good stuff, then you can also join our Patreon, where you get exclusive access to all our content ahead of time, as well as that other stuff that we just talked about. As always, we would love to hear your thoughts and feedback, so drop us a comment below and we'll get right to you. Thank you so much for listening. I'm your host, Ryan. This has been Turning Point Tactics, and we'll see you next Tuesday.
See you next Tuesday.